Pei Zheng, high and mighty as he was, as the imperial master, blessing Sheng Baojia at his birthday banquet, when I was being stripped of my coat and forced to kneel in the freezing cold. After the ceremony, he asked me if I admitted my mistake. I was so frozen that I couldn't utter a word and could only kneel down and lower my head. Such a humble position suits you best. Pei Zheng humiliated me, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to the slave warehouse as soon as possible. Famin must be waiting for me. He said he would celebrate my birthday.
1.
When I kneel in the snow, I no longer feel wronged or angry, because I see through Pei Zheng's intentions behind these tactics. He probably thought that I would be afraid of the wind and snow, and even more ashamed of the looks given to me by those passing by the main road of the mansion. After all, I had been a noble lady in Beijing for 15 years, and I had been arrogant and proud in front of him. But I have never been afraid of the cold since I was a child. When I was 2 or 3 years old, my grandmother rarely let me wear thick coats in the winter. Daddy is guarding the border, and Mom and brother are accompanying him. They only come back twice a year to report on their work. My grandmother said that they suffered hardships at the border, so how could I live a life of luxury in the mansion? When I was a kid, I thought it made sense. I can't be with my father and mother like my brother, but I think if I do this, they will be happy if they know it. So when winter came in my childhood, it meant the beginning of my cold spell. I caught a cold, and my nose is blocked every day. But as long as I didn't have a fever, my grandmother would not allow the court doctor to prescribe medicine for me. She felt that the child was sick and would get better if he endured it. Indeed, it seems that since I was 8 or 9 years old, I have rarely been sick in winter. Even when the wind blows or the snow freezes, I no longer shiver like I did when I was a child. But this time, he was stripped of his coat and forced to kneel down in the snow and ice, and he couldn't hold on any longer. I couldn't stop shaking all over, until my limbs were frozen and my exposed skin was stinging from the cold. But if you ask me why I'm afraid, I really don't. Cold, after all, is the sensation I am most accustomed to.
2.
After the ceremony, Pei Zheng walked out of Sheng's house, surrounded by the Grand Imperial Guard of Honor. Because my legs were stiff, I was dragged all the way back to the Imperial Master's mansion. The hot steam from the incense burner made it difficult for me to see Pei Zheng's face. I only heard him asking me if I knew I was wrong. I nodded, but my frozen lips couldn't utter a word. Oh, you're not going to make a mistake. Feeling somewhat anxious, I knelt on the ground and uttered some murmurous sounds with difficulty, trying to speak clearly. Pei Zheng chuckled. Such a humble gesture is very suitable for Miss Sheng. TSK, I forgot again. You are not Miss Sheng. You are just a criminal slave. I knelt down, not caring about his humiliation. I only thought that if he was happy, he would let me go back to the slave warehouse as soon as possible. Because Fumin must be waiting for me, and I don't want to keep him waiting for long. We made the agreement early in the morning. Last year on this day, I came to Ji, and this year on this day, he came to hold a hairpin ceremony for me. 3. But no matter how anxious I am, I can just kneel quietly at this moment, waiting for Pei Zheng to calm down, not daring to say anything more. This time he was angry for no apparent reason. First, among the 10 criminal slaves in the Imperial Master's mansion, he asked me alone whether I wanted to attend the birthday party of the eldest daughter of the Sheng mansion. Naturally, I didn't dare to express my own opinion and just said, "Just follow my orders." Pei Zheng said, "I am asking you a question, not asking you to follow my orders." So he let me go down and receive the punishment. This has happened so many times in the past year that I have lost count. I still remember the first time I tried to argue with him. At that time, I was still naive and thought that as long as I explained it clearly, I would not be punished. But Pei Zheng increased the punishment as I kept defending myself. He said, "A slave should behave like a slave." Then I asked Chui Yao to slap me in the face in front of the mansion gate. I was forced to kneel down, and after each slap, he made me kowtow and shout, "I admit my mistakes, my lowly slave." They can force me to kneel and kowtow, but I don't want to shout. What can they do to me? Looking back now, I can no longer accurately judge what I was insisting on at that time. Perhaps it was because he still carried in his heart the pride of being a Beijing noble who had been supported by his status for the past 15 years. Or maybe I don't want to give up the character of the great men in the book whom I admired and respected. Or maybe I don't want to lose my self-respect in front of Pei Zheng, in front of these former slaves. My face was slapped with blood and my knees were bruised, but I still refused to give in. Cui Yao slapped his opponent one after another, her eyes changing from pleased at first to embarrassed later on. She rubbed her hands, glanced at the indifferent Pei Zheng, and said fiercely, "Do you still think you are some high and mighty lady? Okay." Then she showed a cruel smile. "Take off her clothes for me. How dare a lowly slave like you think you are noble?" I looked up in disbelief. Cui Yao laughed happily, while Pei Zheng on the side just watched coldly. The day when the slaves were reduced to slaves, my original surname was taken away from me, and I could only have a name. I named myself Yuanxin. I hope that from now on, I can start anew, and everything will be new. I thought that there could be no worse fate than to be overthrown from my former position and to fall from the upper class. And in such a situation, I still want to start again, and nothing can bring me down. But when the clothes were torn off, in broad daylight, I struggled desperately to cover my chest, with my naked upper body exposed to everyone. Still, something broke deep inside me. When they stepped forward and grabbed my hands and were about to pull them apart, I finally shouted out for the first time, "I know I'm wrong." The dignity of resolute persistence will eventually be defeated by shame. 4. In fact, what was I really thinking when I started to fight? Deep in the secret place of my heart, I was thinking that Pei Zheng would be soft-hearted and he would not really let me fall into such a situation. No, it won't really happen. I was wrong. No one will be soft-hearted for me, just as they don't love me. After that punishment, I understood this and never took chances again. Therefore, in the following year, although there were many such things, I would not resist or struggle. No one will feel sorry for me. No one will protect me. But I have to love myself and protect myself. In the face of being alive, living healthily, and living with all limbs intact, the sense of dignity of one's identity and the shame of being a human being can all give way. When I truly began to abandon worldly dogmas and not fear the eyes of the world, I began to become indestructible. 5. So this time, just taking off my coat and kneeling outside the Sheng Mansion Master's Hall was nothing to me. Pei Zheng probably forgot that he had asked me to serve guests as a slave at a banquet in early summer. At that time, the second son of the Qin family was very surprised to see me and said to Pei Zheng, "After all, she was once the daughter of the Sheng family. Is it inappropriate for her to behave like this now? Why not change her to a servant?" I know that the second young master of the Qin family had some crush on me, but that was before I was convicted. I didn't expect that he was willing to speak for me at this moment. But I had been taught that slaves should not interrupt when their masters were talking, so I just knelt quietly beside them without even raising my head. Pei Zheng's words were slightly cold. But what did this lowly slave say? He actually aroused the sympathy of the second young master. Master Chen seemed to have sensed Pei Zheng's displeasure and said quickly, No, I made a mistake." I listened to everything in silence, without any emotion in my heart. She was neither moved by what Chen Er had said before, nor was she heartbroken by his avoidance at this moment. Pei Zheng only chuckled. "Second master, you are too polite. How can this be your problem? This slave must not have served you attentively enough." Chen Er smiled awkwardly and didn't dare to say anything else. Pei Zheng was not relenting. "Then let this lowly slave entertain us. Come on, just crawl around the banquet table and imitate the barking of a dog to make everyone laugh." The scene suddenly became quiet. Without any hesitation, I knelt down and began to crawl, shouting as I crawled. I was afraid that if I stayed for one more second, Pei Zheng would increase the punishment. I had suffered this before. After walking around once, I didn't even look up, I just knelt quietly. Pei Zheng couldn't find any fault, so he could only let it go. I have endured such insults before, so what does this mean to me now? 6. It's just that I can endure walking in the darkness and still have hope in my heart. The hairpin gift that I agreed tonight with fuming is one of them. Regarding this hairpin ceremony, what we actually want is just a little bit of ritual sense of happiness in our daily slave labor. No fancy clothes are needed, but we will wear clean clothes that have been washed and exposed to the sun. I don't need bright sunlight, but I look forward to the moon in the quiet night. Of course, it doesn't matter if you don't have it. We don't need a house full of guests. 2 of us are enough in this world. Then Fumin will witness me grow another year older, and I will tell Fumin that I am 1 year closer to completing my sentence. But Peijun cruelly shattered my expectations.
7.
He stepped down from his perch and pinched my face with his fingers. It's really boring. Have you finally gotten tired of torturing me like this? I had a blank expression on my face and lowered my head. Peijung's fingertips were warm, and when they touched my frozen face, they brought a slight sting. This is the only face left. It still has some beauty, he said, using his fingertips to forcefully push my face away, and uttered cold words. I will sleep with you tonight. At this moment, I was at a loss. I forgot the rules out of habit and looked up at Peijung. His expression was normal, as if he was talking about something very casual. But I felt as if I fell into an icy cave in an instant. All the slaves in the slave warehouse were of lowly status. Some were convicted of crimes and enslaved like me, and some were born slaves, born as children of slaves. But as long as you are a slave, you have no human rights. Once taken away by various governments, life and death are no longer in their own hands. Beating, scolding, hard labor, and sexual gratification are all normal things. I lowered my head and clenched my hands tightly. The surging emotions in my mind kept asking,
Why?
Why do I have to endure this? Resist.
Fight.
What are you afraid of? What if I die? But reason is trying hard to suppress the anger and hatred that is rolling out. Just be patient. Nothing is impossible. There are only 2 years left, and I will be free in 2 years. Don't let your past hibernation become meaningless because of a momentary impulse. But 2 years, how much more do I have to endure? I tasted blood in my mouth. I lowered my head. In my blurred vision, a drop of water wet my skirt, and I hurriedly raised my hand to cover it. I heard myself say, yes.
8.
History always seems to repeat itself. Will miserable people experience the same despair at the same time over and over again? Last November, I knew that I would not have a coming-of-age ceremony in 20 days. The worst outcome would probably be being sent to a country farm to fend for oneself, or being demoted to a commoner and never cared about again. But just when I thought this was the saddest ending, something worse always happened. I heard my mother say to my father, but we can only tell the public that it was the child's parents who deliberately switched the baby, which led to Baojia being stranded outside for nearly 15 years. The white-haired father was silent for a long time before he spoke. This child has already shielded Baojia from disasters for 15 years. How can we let her bear this again? I huddled behind the curtains beneath the high platform of the ancestral hall, my breathing even stagnating. I couldn't see my mother's expression, but I knew that her voice didn't hesitate at all, and she was as calm, confident, and steady as always. She said, "How can I prevent disaster?" She is an orphan in the war, and it is a great blessing for her to be able to take Baojia's place and live in the general's mansion. Now it's time for her to repay the debt. Moreover, if people knew that we were intentionally using another child to replace Baojia as a shield in the general's mansion, what would they think of us? The father's voice was still a little hesitant. It was us. The mother snorted coldly, interrupting the father's unspoken words. Then if everyone knows the truth, how will our Baojia deal with it in the future? Are you going to let her, the daughter of a noble family, bow her head in gratitude to a wild child? How can Baojia marry a good family in the future? Even if you don't consider the reputation of the mansion, you should consider the children. Finally, my father stopped talking. I couldn't help shaking. I could only hold my breath and bite my hands to prevent any sound. After they left that day, I hid until very late. When I returned to the yard, no one noticed that I had been missing for so long. Just like when I was growing up, every time I felt wronged, I would hide under the curtains of the ancestral hall and curl up. No one noticed that I was missing. No one could find me. I sat on the bed, wrapped in a thick quilt, but still felt cold.
9.
The first time I felt like everything was a dream was after my parents came back, and I found out that I was not a child of the noble family. After the mother gave birth at the border, she took the wrong baby away. Their real daughter was raised in a farmer's home at the border. Over the next half-month, I watched the mansion being completely renovated, and they made all the preparations, waiting for Shung Baojia to return from the border. This makes me feel like the past decade or so have been a dream, and I can't find any sense of reality at all. The second time was when I lay prone on the ground, listening to my mother and father discussing the matter, and only then did I realize how unbearable the truth was. The third time was on the day of Gigi, when officials came to take me away. The charge was that the parents had stolen and exchanged their babies, and the children had to pay for it. I turned my head and saw my father's solemn expression, my mother's cold eyes, and my brother turning his head away to avoid my cry for help. No one, whether from the government or the people, believed the truth I told. Later, I stood naked among many slaves, being pushed and washed. Everything was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from, and I had no one to turn to for help.
10.
A year later, that nightmare-like feeling came back again. When the nanny came to teach me how to please Pei Zheng, my thoughts were still wandering. Pei Zheng and I were originally engaged. At that time, Pei Zheng was just the eldest son of Duke Pei's mansion, and the two families arranged a marriage for us. Later, Duke Pei's mansion was about to be in trouble, and my grandmother knew about it in advance. I was asked to put on a show and ruin the engagement. When I was 12 years old, I felt my grandmother's gentle teaching for the first time, so I was willing to be the bad guy for the sake of my family. I verbally humiliated Pei Zheng at the palace banquet, causing him to break the engagement jade pendant. 3 months later, Duke Pei's mansion was convicted. I thought I did the right thing. But now, revenge has come. I recalled that when I was assigned to the Imperial Preceptor's mansion, I tried my best to tell Pei Zheng the truth. Pei Zheng's fierce eyes were as intimidating as those of a ferocious beast. He said, "Do you think I will believe it? How long did it take you to come up with such a poor argument?"
Huh.
Even if that's true, it can't wash away your despicable nature of fawning on the powerful. Is it despicable? Am I wrong? Why am I the only one who is wrong, and the only one who is punished? I tried my best to force myself not to think about certain things, so that my tears would not be seen in my eyes. This year since I became a slave, I have reworn my clothes and burned incense for the first time. When Pei Zheng came in, he just glanced at me contemptuously and said, "No one taught you to kneel?" I knelt down, and my hands hidden under the brocade were so tense that they were cramping slightly. Pei Zheng seemed very happy and treated me like an interesting object. I obey, restrain, and let it go. I wonder if there have been people like me in the past thousands of years of history? I have fallen into the quagmire and the abyss. I have felt desperate as I struggled to my death, but I still tried to survive in despair. I've seen it. The ups and downs that were recorded in history, the turmoil in their lives that were described in just a few words, were all the hell they had to go through. So no, misery is not a cycle. Someone will always struggle out, so why can't I be one of them? 11. It was almost dawn when I staggered back to the slave warehouse. On a fixed day every month, criminal slaves needed to return to the slave warehouse for training. I happened to be in that batch on the 30th of the month. Although Pei Zheng asked me to sleep with him, I could not go back to my room to rest after the ceremony. I still had to report before noon according to the rules. Slaves who could read and write had to give monthly training. But this time I didn't write about virtue or repentance. I wrote about how I realized during this year's work how wonderful life was in the past, how grateful I was to this homeland, and how critical I was of the customs of several southwestern countries. Then I returned to the small room in the slave warehouse with pain and fatigue all over my body. If I had been able to return last night, I would have found time to meet Famine before dawn, but it was already afternoon. Soon, I will return to the Imperial Master's mansion before it gets completely dark. Once again, we didn't have the chance to meet each other. The setting sun is accompanying me outside the window. I changed into the new clothes that had been prepared long ago, combed my hair, boiled some water, and made myself a cup of aged tea.
Happy birthday to me.
I wish I got what I wanted.
12.
Although I received fewer punishments after sleeping with Pei Zheng no longer criticized me intentionally or unintentionally. But the nights became difficult, and I began to have trouble sleeping. Slaves cannot stay overnight, so after I finish, I usually sit on the couch in the outer room and watch the moon. It is the moon that remains unchanged, and it is also the moon that changes every day. I know I have to be patient and wait. Watching the moon calms my mind. But Pei Zheng started to let me stay overnight after half a month. He would sometimes whisper in my ear, "Be good, I won't let you get hurt. Doesn't it hurt?" I sneered in my heart. I've never been afraid of pain. Cui Yao was the first to change among the crowd. She no longer ordered me around, and sometimes even had a flattering look on her face. I roughly understand the source of this change, but I don't want to delve into it at all. I have no intention of doing anything to Cui Yao. She is just a poor chess piece, being manipulated by others. How can she control her own emotions? If you are bitten by a dog, you should go find the dog's owner. Dogs are just animals. When the owner is punished, he will take out his anger on the dog, and the dog will not feel good about it. 13. December of the old year and January of the new year passed quickly in my life, like The Walking Dead. Before I could completely swallow the bitter contraceptive medicine in my mouth, Pei Zheng came over and pinched my face. "Wanna be a spy?" He stroked my cheek and asked softly, "Why don't I marry you?" My heart sank, and I lowered my eyes to hide my expression. There are limits to the law and order. A concubine must be of good character. I knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "I know that I am humble and cannot do this." Pei Zheng seemed extremely reluctant to have me chosen as a spy. Since Dakian fell apart 30 years ago, each of the princes became a king, and it has become a tacit understanding that the kingdoms send spies to each other. The Lin kingdom was weak. If Pei Zheng had not turned the tide 2 years ago, the country might have been destroyed long ago. In the past 2 years, the king has been obsessed with using spies for reconnaissance. However, one must have some understanding of the customs of several southwestern countries, and it would be best if one can read and write and be loyal to one's own country. It takes time to cultivate such people. So I don't care what Pei Zheng thinks, I know I will definitely be selected. 14. Once again, I stepped onto the yellow sand road in March, when the grass was green and the birds were singing. We still need to walk for another 20 days before we can get out of the border of Lin State. Then, after another half a month, I arrived at my destination this time, Zheng State. The commander, who was accompanying us, never stopped to teach us 5 spies along the way. When I was young, I was lonely, so I read classics in the Sheng Mansion library year after year, which helped me understand many things. But this does not prevent me from eagerly absorbing the true knowledge summarized by the commanders from practice. Reading and studying are the only things I have gained in the past 16 years, which will belong to me forever and will never be lost. This time the journey was faster than planned, and we reached the border in just 16 days. After the document has passed the border of our country, we can no longer travel openly like this. I looked back at the city wall. It was as silent as ever. It's just that the dark brown marks on the soil and the thick walls are deeper than the last time I looked. 15. 2 years ago, my grandmother passed away. It happened that Zheng and Chang invaded. My father was ordered to guard the border, and our family was unable to return. With the courage and fearlessness of a young man, I traveled all the way to the border, walking on the yellow sand road. This road, which seems to be the smoothest now, took me 2 full months to walk when I was 14. When I arrived at the border, the war had subsided. I was standing far away on the sand dune, my clothes ragged, but I saw my father fixing my brother's clothes and a girl about my age snuggling in her mother's arms, having a lot of fun. Ignorance and impulsiveness gave me the courage to set out on my own after handling my grandmother's funeral. Desire and expectation make me persevere despite the ups and downs along the way and the difficulties in the world. I thought I was so lucky that I could reach the border safely with my ignorant and fearless spirit. Looking back now, I realized that was the door that hell had just opened for me.
16.
I was punished for coming to the border without permission. But the physical punishment was not the most unbearable thing. What was unbearable was that I wanted to ask about that girl, but I didn't dare to open my mouth. I didn't ask in the end. My father and mother kept asking me to repeat the last scene before my grandmother passed away, and I greedily clung to this rare time we spent together. Then he used his grandmother's matter to let out all his grievances and pain. Before my grandmother passed away, she held my hand for the first time. She looked at me with her cloudy eyes and murmured, "Protect the family." I conveyed my grandmother's final wish to defend the country to my father and mother. But my mother, who was always calm and composed, suddenly collapsed, and my father's eyes also flickered. My grandmother is the person I have spent the most time with, yet she is the person I am least close to. But I still feel sad about my grandmother's passing. So at that time, I thought I fully understood their emotions. 17. After settling matters in the army, we set off for home. I picked up Fumin on the way back home with my parents and brother. His entire family died in the famine, leaving him alone, wandering along the way. When I first met him, he was struggling among a group of refugees, trying to survive. When they met again, he wanted to go to the capital, but was stopped outside the border town because he had no documents and almost starved to death. Those eyes that never became numb and never gave up hope despite repeated despair made me recognize him at once. So Fu Ming became the only person who forgot the warnings in the book and showed kindness during my journey. That was also the only time in my life that I insisted on doing something despite my parents' disapproval. But these are also the few things that I, at the age of 16, do not regret when I recall them. After I was convicted, no one cared about Fu Ming. He successfully left Xing Mansion and found a job next to the slave warehouse. We agreed that after I completed my 3-year sentence, we would leave this dangerous place together, find a small village, and work from sunrise to sunset. 18. I turned my head and stopped looking at Lingua behind me. All the past events are now in the past. I can't wait until my 3-year sentence is over.
I have to find a way out for myself.
The only thing I regret is that I didn't find a chance to see Fumin again before leaving. I have no one else in this world. My father is not my father, and neither is my mother. My brother can turn around and be nice to his other sister even though we are no longer related by blood. They all thought I took everything from her. But who will give me back the life that should belong to me? In the end, only Fumin stayed with me. I cried to Fumin and asked him why this happened.
Now I won't ask.
Who will give me my life back? I'll do it myself. 19. It was 3 years later that I saw Fu Ming again. I was riding a red-tasseled warhorse, facing Pei Zheng in front of the army. He captured Fu Ming and threatened me to retreat. In fact, Pei Zheng had already sent a secret message 3 days ago. He wanted me to go back to Lin country and to his mansion. Otherwise, Fu Ming would be tortured to death.
I didn't tell anyone about this.
So Xie Jin beside me was a little surprised at this moment. He looked at me with a smile. Who is Fu Ming? Could he be your lover in Lin country? Seeing that I didn't say anything, he regained his composure, frowned slightly, and said in a deep voice, "As the commander of an army, don't let your emotions get the better of you." I signaled to Xie Jin with my eyes to stay calm, then turned and looked at Pei Zheng in the distance. He was still sitting on the horse, but he no longer looked as high up and unclimbable as I remembered. I raised my voice and said, "If you kill Fu Ming, the reason for our war today will be to avenge him." Pei Zheng seemed a little surprised. He said in a dull voice, "How can you be so hateful that you don't care about your friend's life or death at all? With a character like this, I'm afraid he'll be able to sell out his own soldiers, I will one day." Master Pei's words are really heart-piercing. I purred my breath, spoke loudly, and showed no fear. Personally, I have never owed Fu Ming anything. I have no obligation to save him. Lun Gong, you kidnapped him, which was a despicable act. If you killed him, you would be guilty of killing your own countrymen. War is a matter of state and of importance to both armies. We will not give up an inch of territory. But if you are willing to release Fu Ming, I can promise to dismount and take off my armor to fight. Pei Zhang was furious. I'm going to say this for the last time. I want you to take off your armor and surrender. I saw Famen, with his hands and feet tied and his mouth gagged, struggling desperately. I know what Fu Ming wants to say to me, and I also know Pei Zhang's character. When I received that letter, I knew I was going to lose for Min. I said loudly with a calm face that I had rehearsed thousands of times, I'll say this one last time. Pei Zhang, if you kill Fu Ming, I will cut you into pieces and pay you 100-fold. Pei Zhang said disdainfully, Sheng Ti, you will regret this.
20.
Sheng Ti?
Who is Sheng Ti?
Before coming to Zheng, I had no idea that I would end up on this path. But just like in my previous life, I never had a correct prediction. I can get into worse situations than I ever imagined, and I can get out of better situations than I ever imagined. I met Xie Jin, and I realized that I had a strong talent for leading troops in battle. I had my chance, and I took it. From the moment I walked out of Sheng Mansion, from the moment I stood up in the snow, from the moment I stepped out of the border of Lin country, from the moment I returned to this land, I'm always opening new chapters. Sheng Ti, be alert. What do you want me to be afraid of? What do you want me to be in awe of? I am no longer Sheng Ti. I don't have a surname. My name is Yuanxin. A new year begins with a new one. 21. This war caused the Lin Kingdom to lose 3 cities. Military achievements can make Pei Zhang leap from a son of a criminal to an imperial teacher. Defeat in battle can also make him fall from the altar again. The spies reported that suspicions about Pei Zhang had begun to arise within the Lin Kingdom. Don't worry, this is just the beginning. I wiped the red tasseled spear in my hand. In fact, I don't know how to use a spear. I'm better at deploying troops and making plans. When I first came to Xie Jin as a spy, I stood out because of this. Later, it took me only 3 months to conquer several tribes on the border of Zheng State for Xie family. Only then did Xie Jin suggest that I learn some martial arts. That was my first step to gain Xie's trust. Later, I told him honestly about my past and my purpose, which was the second step to gaining trust. It doesn't matter whether they trust me completely or not. As long as our current goals and interests are the same, we can still achieve win-win cooperation. I put the spear back on the rack and Xie Jin came in through the tent. Pei Zhang threatened the second prince and demanded negotiations. Using the second prince as a threat? I frowned and looked at Xie Jin. Shouldn't Xie have given up on this person when he was sent to Lin country as a hostage? Xie Jin smiled and said, that being said, we cannot reject it outright. Otherwise, we will have a hard time explaining to the royal family. Pei Zhang asked me to meet him alone. I refused. What a joke. How stupid does he think I am to listen to his threats and disregard my own safety? How confident must I be to think that I would agree to negotiate with him alone? 22. Before the negotiation, I did not agree to any of the terms and conditions proposed by Pei Zhang. General Sheng, please don't act on impulse. If Master Pei can't even remember my name, then there's nothing more to talk about. I stood up and was about to leave. Yuan Xin. I stopped and looked back at him. You see, Pei Zhenghui is not the only one who can use threats. With equal status and rights, people who once had to be looked up to see and who they once found scary will now be obedient. Do you and I have to come to this point? What do you mean by this, Master Pei? Pei Zhang took a step forward and stretched out his hand as if he wanted to grab me, but I dodged to the side. Being so close to him, I finally noticed that Pei Zhang's face was not looking good. He seemed to have not had a good rest for a long time, and his eyes were gray. Yuan Xin. Pei Zhang paused, as if he had endless things to say, and finally uttered only one sentence. If you come back, I will make you my first wife. I felt my stomach churn. This is really disgusting. I didn't try to hide my unbearable expression. Pei Zhang, who do you think you are? As a defeated opponent, how can you be so shameless as to say such a thing? Yuan, stop talking. Every time you say a word, I feel like I'm seeing a vicious dog barking and spewing feces from its mouth. It's disgusting. I saw Pei Zhang standing there in a daze, his face full of pain, and I just felt impatient. There was nothing more to talk about, so I took Xie Jin and left. 23. In the evening, I was riding my horse on the hill as usual, but I saw Peijing coming to see me alone. There was no one around me at the moment, but I was not afraid of him at all. I sat on my horse and looked down at him. Master Pei, is it not enough to disgust me during the day, so you disgust me again at night? Yuan Xian, can we have a good talk? Hey, what else haven't you talked about yet? I quietly moved the hand holding the reins to the side of my leg, where the dagger was tied close to my body. I was thinking about how likely it was that I could kill him right here. I already know what happened back then. That's enough. I dismounted, walked towards him, and slowed down my tone. Peijing, why don't you just tell me what you want? Peijing had his back to the moonlight, so I couldn't quite see his expression. I could only hear his usually cold voice tremble a little. Come back with me, okay? I stopped 5 steps away from him, and at this moment I really felt incredible. Peijing, what are you dreaming about? Do you still remember how you treated me? Do you still remember that you killed Famine just a few days ago? How dare you ask me to go back with you now? After a long silence, Peijing spoke, seeming to be filled with endless loneliness. Is it because he accompanied you through that dark time that you always remember him? Stop thinking about fuming, okay? Forget everything in the past and start over, okay? Peijing never spoke like this before. He never asked okay or not. So, if something is easy to get, no one will cherish it. I looked at him coldly and found him ridiculous, pathetic, and hateful. As long as you come back with me, I heard his voice gradually become steady and firm. I can bear everything that was done to you before. Yeah? I took another step towards him and smiled suddenly. Okay, I soften my tone. Then kneel down and admit your mistake to me. Peijing's body stiffened for a moment, then he knelt down. I'm still a little surprised that he could do this. Kneeling made him look shorter, and a ray of moonlight shone on his face. I saw that he was pale, and his lips were trembling as if he wanted to say something. I put away my teasing expression and told him what he had said to me before. To admit your mistakes, shouldn't you kowtow and say, I know I'm wrong? The man's figure swayed, and he looked up at me with eyes full of emotion. I didn't have the energy to identify those things and laughed. Why? No? Are you feeling humiliated? Or angry? But there have been many things that were more extreme than this, such as bump. Your lowly slave knows you're wrong. Peijing suddenly kowtowed and interrupted me. He spoke word by word and said, I know I'm wrong. When he did it again, it seemed to go much more smoothly. He kept bowing his head and talking. Time seemed to go back, figures overlapped, and I saw the girl, who was also kneeling. I can finally talk to her and tell her not to be afraid, that she has come through it so strongly, that I am fine now, and that we have been reborn. Peijing's forehead was covered in blood, and I truly felt refreshed in my heart. But soon, the pleasure disappeared, and I felt dissatisfied. It is not enough to simply return the violence that the abuser has inflicted on me. None of this can offset the hurt I've suffered. Because I suddenly realized that being hurt is being hurt. What's the point of others doing it again? What I want to do most at this moment is to make Peijing disappear. Every day he lives in this world is a waste of my past and the dead Famine. 24. I took a step towards him, but when I was 2 steps away, Peijing suddenly looked up. I was startled and stopped where I was, trying hard to control my facial expression and not show any sound. Yuan Xian, come back with me. I will do whatever you want. Peijing looked at me pleadingly. I could no longer find any trace of the look I once admired in his face. Really? I started to move closer to him again, and he was not on guard. I slowly lowered my body and leaned closer to his ear. Peijing, go to hell. My dagger pierced his heart accurately. To prevent any accidents, I pushed forward with all my strength and turned it twice more vigorously. There was a rustling sound of breaking air all around, and Peijing's secret guards quickly appeared and snatched him from my hands. The next moment, the sword was pointed at me, and I raised the dagger in my hand ready for a desperate fight. If I can delay a little longer, someone from the army will come. Don't hurt her. Peijing coughed up a mouthful of blood after saying this. Ahem, let her go. I marveled at his stupidity. Instead of taking my life right now, he's thinking of letting me go. Without hesitation, I turned and ran.
25.
I returned to the military tent and told Siejin about this. Together with several other generals, we immediately began to prepare for another war. The Lin state had long run out of available talent, and the Zheng state was making rapid progress. It was not until the troops arrived at the capital of Lin state that we received the news that Pei Zheng was not dead yet. His heart was 1 inch longer, and he escaped death. I feel very sorry. When Siejin placed Lin Kingdom's peace terms in front of me, I just shook my head and let the Xie family handle it on their own. As the commander of an army, what I care about is how to capture the city with the least loss. What I'm thinking about is how to minimize the casualties of both countries. As an individual, when Siejin asked me, I only made one request. I want Pei Zheng to be cut into pieces, and his body to be hung in front of the city and left exposed for 3 months. I went to watch the ceremony. Pei Zheng looked at me before he died and seemed to realize my indifference and determination. I saw reluctance, regret, pain, and despair mixed in his eyes, and then with each falling cut, it finally turned into real, cutting pain. Under the punishment of cutting flesh and removing bones, even the most courageous person would howl. He was unrecognizable and truly looked like an animal. 26. After watching the execution, I sat down and continued to attend the banquet. The Lin officials present did not know my past, but Sheng Baojia, who was already the crown princess, knew it, as did the Sheng Guogong couple, who had already retired from the duke's mansion, and the Sheng Guogong son, who had already married and had children. They looked terrified and full of disbelief, and then their faces turned red, as if they wished the saint would eat my flesh and drink my blood. Duke Sheng raised his hand tremblingly and pointed at me. You? But he couldn't utter a complete sentence for a long time. The duke's wife hurriedly pulled his hand away, but knocked over the dishes on the table. The bright red apple rolled to my feet. A small bowl of noodle soup was scattered all over the floor. 27. There are always some strange statements in the storybooks. For example, if children love their parents, they will roll up their skirts and make a portion of soup. So I prepared the food, marinated the meat, and let the dough rest. I completed every step myself without asking anyone else to do it for me. After working hard all day, I finally made a bowl of yuanbao noodles. But I watched the gorgeous sky at dusk become heavy and deep, and the moon gradually rose high and then sank to the west. They still didn't come back. The salzik, which was steaming hot and fragrant when just out of the pot, has now become cold, and the soup is congealed with oil. The fresh leaves turned yellow, and the noodles became stiff after being rested. I sat on the doorstep unruly and twisted the tassel of my skirt. I know that the noodles in the kitchen will never get put into the pot again. But what's wrong with noodles? I stood up, stretched my stiff legs, and went to the kitchen to cook all the noodles. Heat the oil in the pan again and heat up the sauce. I slowly ate the noodles I made myself. They were fragrant and delicious. After 2 bowls of soup, my stomach felt as full as my heart. Surprisingly, the noodle soup was just as much as before. At that time, I thought it was okay that Dad and Mom didn't get to eat it. Noodle soup is slightly salty. 28. Now I am looking at the extremely old couple of the Sheng family and the crown prince and crown princess, whose faces have become completely unfamiliar. There is no more resentment, jealousy. But Sheng Baojia rushed forward. Although Zheng state spared Lin state, it killed the crown prince and the emperor's grandson. They allowed the current monarch of Lin state to die of natural causes, but that was the end of it. The glory of Lin kingdom has come to an end, and the former nobles will be reduced to forced labor. You are not dead yet. Why don't you die? She was mad and roared at me, then frantically told the people around her about my experience as a slave in Lin country. Siejin was furious and was about to kill her, but only the Sheng couple came up to stop him. I raised my hand to stop this farce and didn't care about Sheng Baojia telling others about the past. I did come out of the mire, but so what? These real things were never my fault, and I will never feel ashamed or inferior about them. What's more, all those past hardships are now my medals. I looked at Sheng Baojia coldly. If you are crazy, Just commit suicide and don't implicate others. Sheng Baojia ignored him and laughed crazily after shouting, "How dare you live? How dare you live after being humiliated and despised like that?" I felt sad and ironic looking at her like this. "Then why should I die?" I asked her. "Why should I die at the will of someone like you? You belittle me, insult me, and torture me. Don't you just want to see me desperate, angry, and helpless? Now that I can't see anymore, you're going to use those things to kidnap me and kill me? How ridiculous. Look at you now. Who do you think you are? Are you qualified to decide his life and death? Why don't I want to die? Because my death at that time would be just like the countless slaves who died in the slave warehouse, like a drop of water falling into the sea, without any ripples. I died in a humble, lowly, and dirty way, while they still lived happily, nobly, and had the power of life and death.
Why?
I can die, but I want to die standing, I want to die meaningfully, and I want to die without any regrets. I looked at Sheng Baojia in front of me, and I knew what she wanted to do. She didn't want me to have an easy life, so she deliberately brought up the past to make me suffer. Her face was already covered in tears, but she was still nagging. "But who are you? You are just a lowly slave, you." "Huh," I sneered, Sheng Baojia. "In ancient times, there was Taishigong who was tortured and wrote the historical records, and there was Han Xian who became a famous general after being humiliated. Now, there is Yuan Xian who is unyielding and has achieved nirvana in the mire. Do you believe that my name will still appear in history 100 years from now? And you, will you still have a chance to be reborn?" Sheng Baojia, with a dusty face, had a look of horror and opened his mouth wide as if he wanted to shout something. I looked at her indifferently and kicked away the wife of Duke Sheng who rushed towards me and tried to plead with me with family affection. Then he glanced coldly at Duke Sheng who was standing beside him with a look of regret on his face and immediately stopped his steps forward. The Prince of Shengwu came forward to support his mother and began to kowtow. I didn't look at them again, but just walked forward with sword in hand, looking down at Sheng Baojia who was crawling on the ground. "No, Sheng Baojia, you won't have such an opportunity again. You are nothing." I calmly said the first and last words I would say to her in my life, and calmly raised my knife and cut off the wound. This banquet ended in blood. 29. After the Xie family took control of Zheng and Lin, Xie Jin wanted to appoint me as the general. He said, "There was once a female empress of the Liang family who made Qi Shu the first female general of Daqian. Now I, Xie, am also willing to be your bull and your steed." I understand what he means. The previous dynasty reached its peak under the empress, and the story of Qi Shu, whom she appreciated, has been passed down to this day. But I shook my head and refused. I don't like killing and fighting. You don't need to worry about me going to other countries. If I want to be an official or a general, this is my best choice. But I don't want to be here. Xie Jin tried to persuade me, but to no avail. Finally, he looked at me for a long time with a gloomy look in his eyes. His emotions were revealed in his eyes, and he said, "So, Yuan Xian, are you willing?" I raised my hand to interrupt his unspoken words. "Wang Ji, I have always regarded you as my best friend. Therefore, I will tell you everything I think and feel. I hope Xie can let me go back and let me enjoy the countryside from now on." Xie Jin didn't stop me anymore. He prepared money and luggage for me and accompanied me for 10 miles. We finally said goodbye in a pavilion in the mountains. "Yuan Xian, do you really know what you are doing?" Xie Jin faced the mountain breeze, her face as beautiful as jade, and finally asked, "Have you really thought about what you want?" I stood up and mounted the horse. The horse took a few steps forward happily. I reined in my horse, looked back, and smiled brightly. Certainly, riding on horses and waving whips, clouds of dust rise towards the setting sun. I have read some books and I can write. I want to witness the mountains, rivers, and people, and I want to write down every inch of land I have stepped on. My life will be spread out between those magnificent moments and those subtle and ordinary moments. When I die one day, the last place I will stay will be my hometown. And at this moment, the afterglow of the setting sun, and the gorgeous sunset glow. After the beautiful colors is the starry night. I know that this night will be followed by a new sunrise, blazing and surging. 30. Actually, at the beginning, I didn't know what I wanted in my life. When I was little, I just wanted my parents to be with me. Later, I hoped I could gain the love of my loved ones. After falling from a great height, my only thought was to continue living well and never let those who wanted me to become depressed and fall into depravity have their wish come true. Then, when I was in the darkness, what I wanted most strongly in my life was that Fu Ming could stay alive and stay with me. But half of my life has passed, and I still can't get what I want. He begged on his knees, with tears in his eyes, but to no avail. 31. Sometimes I wonder if I had understood a lot of things from the beginning, if I had been smart and clear-headed from the beginning. Then, as I grew up over the years, my parents at the border never asked about me, never mentioned me in any letters, and I knew they didn't love me. In my careful flattery and obedience, they never thought about my future. I realized that no matter what I did, I could not get their love. In contrast to Sheng Baojia's more than 10 years of peace and security, I should have understood long ago that parents have long-term plans for their daughters, and I should not have harbored any hopes and thus not have my expectations shattered. Through Pei Zheng's torture, I can get a glimpse into people's hearts and the most hidden demands of human nature. I can use these to protect myself and Fu Ming. But everything was already destined from the beginning. I was born knowing nothing. I grow up step by step and understand little by little. Life is not a story. Not all misunderstandings will be resolved and all truths will be revealed. When I was young, I also hoped that one day Pei Zheng would regret it. Then I would be happy in front of him and he would fall into the abyss of pain. He will kneel down and beg. He will regret his actions. And I will never forgive. But no, it didn't happen while I was still expecting it. What should I do? 32. I remembered what Pei Zheng once asked me. Is it because it was Fu Ming who accompanied me through the most difficult times, so I always have him in my heart? Nope. It was not Fa Min who walked with me. I wanted to go through it myself. The principles I have understood in my life are all my own understandings. When he found Fu Ming, he was in grief over the death of his family. While encouraging him, I also realized that living well in the present and future is more important than the past. When he felt inferior because of his background, I was suddenly deeply moved by what the book said. Are kings, princes, generals, and ministers born into a certain class? During my confused days and nights, when I saw that Fa Min was also suffering because of my conviction, I suddenly realized that suffering itself was meaningless. As long as I know what I want, those methods that use human nature to humiliate and torture me will not work. As long as I don't care, these won't hurt me. When the pain was particularly severe, I would only very occasionally bury my face in the quilt at night and howl silently. 33. So, what to do? It doesn't matter. If the mountain doesn't come to me, I will go to the mountain. If no one comes to save me, I will save myself. From the day the authorities came to take me away, I would never again desire or beg for love from anyone. Kneeling in the snow day and night, he no longer expected that one day Pei Zheng would discover the truth himself. I told myself not to lose the right to love just because I was hurt, but just to remember this lesson. Love yourself first before loving others. I want to have a higher status than them. I want the right to speak and be heard. I had nothing to begin with, but luckily I was able to survive. But when I really possessed status and power, looking back, the people and things of the past seemed a little distant from me. The things I was obsessed with when I was a child, and the things I was entangled with when I was young, all seemed to become ordinary later. I don't care about who is who. 34. On my way to the border that year, I already realized that my sadness was far from significant. The people I saw struggling to survive among the ruins gave me hope in the subsequent negotiations. I am still alive and well amidst all these ups and downs. I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life and had the opportunity to do it. I want to use the remaining precious time to treat myself well. There is nothing better than this. I set foot on the prosperous and ruined mountains and rivers. The breeze blows gently and the water is calm.